It looks great.
Awesome. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking to you all tonight about prairie bees and some other pollinators that you might find in your gardens or in other pollinator habitat. Before we go ahead and get started, we can introduce ourselves. I'll let Elaine kick things off. You're muted, Elaine.
Hello, my name is Elaine Evans. I'm an extension educator and researcher working out of the Bee Lab at the University of Minnesota on the St. Paul campus. And to give you some background and how I got into bees, you can start animating through the list. So I was born and raised, and I still live in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I grew up. Some kids who get into to insects later, they're into insects from the start. There's so many little kids that are going around making insect collections and all that kind of stuff. That was not me. I wasn't scared of insects. They were okay, but just wasn't really my thing. I was doing a lot more kind of artsy things, doing lots of music. And it really wasn't until I got into wild places that I started really looking at nature and thinking about nature more. So I started just doing camping and backpacking and getting out there in nature, and just it made me feel so much better that I knew I wanted to spend a lot more time just outside in nature. And that's really what led me to studying biology. Biology was interesting as I spent more time out in nature. I just developed more questions about what's going on out here. Kind of as soon as I started studying biology, I became fascinated with insects. They make up such a huge proportion of the animal life on this planet, but we really don't talk about them that much in general, and especially for conservation. So a lot of my motivation too for getting involved in biology was to be able to work on conservation. And there still is this huge gap with people are talking about insects more, people are talking about pollinators more, but still, there is not as much conservation work on these as is balanced with their importance with what they're doing in the world. So, kind of since I got into biology, since then I ended up focusing on bees and have spent most of my career focused on bee conservation.
Thanks, Elaine. So my name is Elise Bernstein. I am a community engaged researcher with the University of Minnesota Bee Squad. The Bee Squad is the outreach and education arm at the Bee Lab. I also grew up in the Twin Cities and still live in Minneapolis. And I had kind of a more characteristic childhood of somebody who studies insects, where I spent as much time as I possibly could outside, kind of turning over rocks, looking for what was crawling underneath them. I've really had a love for the outdoors and spending time outside for as long as I can remember. When I was in high school, I went on a field-based science trip that kind of helped me decide I wanted to study environmental science in college. But prior to that trip, I didn't realize that a lot of science took place in the field, took place outside, and I thought that was a really exciting way to not only, be able to ask lots of questions that I had, but get to continue spending time outside. I became very obsessed with trees as well as science communication. I worked for an environmental magazine when I was an undergrad, which eventually led me to working with the Bee Lab. And I currently am really passionate about pollinator and native bee education, as well as bumblebee research. I think kind of that intersection between science communication and research is really important and can have a really big impact on conservation. So, to kind of shift gears now into the meat of our content for today, I'm going to kick things off with this poll question. You can pop your answers into the chat. How many species of bees are there in Minnesota? Is it A, 25, B, 50? Oh, that's supposed to say C, 500, or D, 5,000. Seeing lots of good guesses pop into the chat here. So if you guessed 25, that would be just the number of bumblebees that we have in the state of Minnesota. And if you guessed 500, that is the closest number to the number to our bees in Minnesota. We currently have 525 species that have been documented within our state. If you guessed 5,000, that expands out to all of North America. There's about 4,000 species of bees in North America. And then to expand this out globally, there's about 20,000 different species of bees worldwide. So before we get into kind of who these bees are and who some other important pollinators are, I wanted to give a little bit of a background and in insect biology and talk about what makes an insect an insect. The first feature is that they have an exoskeleton made of chitin, so that kind of hardened exterior that you see on insects. They have three body parts. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They have three pairs of legs, so six legs total, and these legs connect to the thorax. They have compound eyes, so these large eyes, often kind of more on the side of their head. And they have two antennae. But what do you notice is missing from this list of what makes an insect an insect? And that is wings. Not all insects have wings. Many of them have four wings, two pairs of wings. Flies, for example, have only two wings, but there are some groups of insects that don't have wings at all. So now that we have that background of what is an insect, what is a bee? How do we distinguish bees from other insects? So bees, we most commonly find at flowers. They get all of their food from flowers. They're primarily using nectar as a carbohydrate source and pollen as a protein source. They're intentionally gathering that pollen on flowers to bring back to their nests to feed to their babies. They're usually fuzzy, though there are many exceptions to this rule, which Elaine will talk about when we get into some more bee specifics later, but generally they are fuzzy. They come in all colors and shapes and sizes. On the left here, we have our largest bee in Minnesota, the black and gold bumblebee, compared to one of our smallest bees, this little tiny metallic sweat bee. You can see the bumblebee is kind of that stereotypical black and yellow, but the sweat bee is, green and metallic. And then again, they come in many different shapes and sizes. So in addition to bees, we have many other pollinators that are important insects that we often see in our gardens that we often call wannabes. And these are insects like flies, wasps, or moths that look very similar to bees and are also pollinators, but they're primarily visiting flowers for nectar. And while they do move some pollen around, they're not as efficient as bees. So we're going to start this off by going through some of these groups of wannabes. So between these flies, bees, and wasps, why do we think there are so many lookalikes? There's lots of different color patterns that these flies and wasps can have. Similarly to bees, they're very diverse. But what is the reason for this? So I have another poll for you all. Why are there so many stripy, buzzy insects on flowers? Is it one, stripes make you look thinner? Two, stripes help you blend in with the flowers? Three, predators get stung by stripy things and learn to leave them alone. Or four, insects visiting flowers can more easily see and hear when other insects are on flowers and go elsewhere. Yeah, seeing lots of correct answers in the chat. The correct answer is three. Predators get stung by stripy things and learn to leave them alone. So for just about every bee or wasp, there is a fly that looks very, very similar. So in this kind of little graphic, on the left, we have our flies, in the middle, we have our bees, and on the right are our wasps. And we can see for every color combination, there is a fly, a bee, and a wasp that looks very, very similar. And that's because, predators get used to bees and wasps that have those particular color patterns that can sting. So flies mimic those colorations. So the first of these wannabes that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth are our wasps, which are, despite many people's wishes, really important insects. Lots of folks have negative experiences with wasps, but they are really important in our gardens. So wasps, their primary characteristics are that they're generally visible. Oh, their waists are generally more slender. So you can see, it is visible and it's generally more slender than what you see on bees. And they're mostly hairless. They're quite shiny. They move a little bit of pollen around. They have some hairs on their body, but they're not intentionally gathering pollen the way bees are. And typically, you will find wasps on flowers, kind of foraging around, drinking nectar. They're not as busy as bees are. Bees, you'll see kind of hopping around a little bit more quickly, like this honeybee as she's foraging in there. The wasps will, usually a little bit more intentionally visit for nectar. They visit many different flowers, and you'll find them anytime between June and September. And one other important character about wasps to keep in mind is, in addition to finding them on flowers for when they're looking for nectar, is that you also may find them looking for smaller pest insects. They're feeding these smaller pest insects to their young. So, wasps, beyond being pollinators, provide important pest control in our gardens. We also have flies as our next wannabe group that are also super important pollinators and also provide pest control. You can see all of these different examples of these flies here, visiting flowers, also primarily looking for nectar. They move around a little bit of pollen, similarly to the wasps, but again, they're not intentionally gathering that pollen. And the flies in their larval stage provide pest control. They will eat a lot of pest insects that we find in our gardens, that might cause harm to our plants. So they're another super important insect. So how do we identify these flies? Some of their characteristics include these very large eyes. If you think of the face of, a housefly that you might see kind of flying around that has those really large eyes that take up the majority of their head, that similar characteristic is something that we see on these flies that you would see on flowers. They also have these small or short, kind of stubby antennae that stick out right from the front of their face. When flies are visiting flowers for nectar, they often hold their wings kind of out to the side or at an angle when they land. And they don't have pollen baskets or pollen carrying hairs. Again, they're visiting flowers for nectar and not intentionally gathering pollen. Some behaviors to look for when you're looking for flies on flowers. You'll often find them sitting on leaves or petals. Sometimes you will see them drinking nectar like the one in this video here, but very often they'll kind of just be perched in a spot. They also kind of will tend to hover over flowers. The more time you spend looking at these insects, in your garden, you'll notice that they fly very differently than bees do. They also will rub their front legs together. This is something you can see in this bottom video here. You'll see them kind of land on a flower and do something like this with their front legs. And then our next group of wannabes or other important pollinators that I just have to mention are butterflies and moths. They have no obvious waist between their thorax and their abdomen. This hummingbird moth photo is a really great example of this. It kind of just looks like this is one solid body. There's not a clearly defined waist like a bee or a wasp or a fly would have. And butterflies and moths also have these long, very straight antennae, and they have very broad wings. Another feature to look for is their curled tongues when they're drinking nectar at a flower. You'll sometimes be able to see them kind of extend that tongue into the flower. And this differs from flies and wasps and bees. Butterflies and moths are visiting flowers for nectar. You'll see them kind of, like I said, stick their tongue into the flower to access that nectar. They, again, don't intentionally gather pollen, but they will move some pollen around. And butterflies and moths are important because they are able to move pollen farther than any other pollinators because they travel much greater distances. And then our last wannabe group or other group of pollinators that you might find foraging in your garden are beetles. Beetles were among the first insects to pollinate flowers millions and millions of years ago, so they kind of co-evolved along with flowers. They're hard-bodied insects. They have elytra, which are like hardened armor-like wing coverings. So this is kind of that outer wing that you see covering their abdomen, and they have their wings that are kind of more stereotypical insect wings that you would picture hiding underneath. Goldenrod soldier beetles are extremely common in Minnesota. You typically start to see them around this time of year, into late summer when the goldenrod is blooming. Beetles are feeding on pollen and nectar when they're visiting flowers. So to wrap up this kind of bees and wannabes section, we're going to test your knowledge with this activity called Bees or Wannabes. And this is an activity that's part of our pollinator education toolkit. So the first one I have for you is, can you find the hummingbird moth? Each of these images here has a little number in the bottom left corner. So when you have your guess, go ahead and paste or put your answer in the Zoom chat. Nice. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of good answers. So the hummingbird moth is number 9. Hummingbird moths are active from May to August. They're really, really, really beautiful pollinators. Sometimes are mistaken for bumblebees because they have that very similar color pattern, but we can see it has these broad wings, curled tongue, and those long antennae. Next, we have our yellow jacket wasp. Oops, I just gave the answer away. You can still go ahead and put your answers in the chat. But yeah, the next one is the yellow jacket wasp, which is number 12. Yellow jackets are active from April to September. They are a social wasp that live in really large colonies that are sometimes considered a nuisance because they may nest close to people's homes, but they do, forage for nectar and move a little bit of pollen around. Next, we have the flower fly. The flower fly is number 4. Flower flies are active all summer, April through September. Sometimes they're also called hoverflies. These you'll see it fairly commonly kind of hanging in the air, hovering around flowers. You'll see them on flowers drinking nectar. They range in size. Sometimes they're very, very tiny. Sometimes they're a little bit big, but they're important pollinators. Then our next wannabe. The paper wasp is number 11. Paper wasps are also active all summer. They're again another highly social group of insects where they have this sort of division of labor with queens and workers. The paper wasps, again, are another wasp or insect or another group of wasps that you might find kind of nesting close to your home. Um, they are really beautiful insects, and they are important pollinators. Okay, and then I think we will pause quickly to see if there are any questions, and then I will turn things over to Elaine to talk more about the bees.
I think you hit all the questions already in the Q&A. There was one to talking about the big black wasps, which you helped to identify. We just got another question in. Are there any wannabes that are predators of bees?
Oh yeah, that's a fun question. There are some wannabes that are predators of bees. Robber flies, you will sometimes see eating bees. Every once in a while, you see a robber fly kind of flying away with a bee in its mouth. Elaine, do you have any other fun examples of?
Those are really the best ones. Yeah,
Yeah,
those butterflies. They look just like bumblebees.
yeah, that's a fun question though.
All we have for now. But do keep your questions coming, folks.
All right, so I am going to move us along into talking about the bees. So bees are a really diverse group, all kinds of different shapes and sizes and colors. And one thing that unites all of the bees is their hairs where their hairs are branched. So a lot of other insects, if you look at wasps, there are some wasps that can be kind of fuzzy. But if you zoom in on their hairs, they'll just be all straight hairs, whereas bees, somewhere on the bees, they will have these branched hairs that look kind of like stalks of wheat or feathers. And those hairs really help them gather pollen, really help the pollen stick to them, so they can really do a good job of carrying pollen back home. That's one of the things that makes bees different than a lot of other of the insects that you see at flowers that do visit flowers. They do move pollen around, but bees are collecting pollen to bring home to their babies. And so they have all kinds of special adaptations for carrying the pollen. One of them is that branched hairs. So today we're going to go over a few of the major groups of bees that you'll see out there, as well as some other interesting ones to help you learn how to recognize what you're seeing out at the flowers. So one of the bees that you will see in many different parts of Minnesota are honeybees. Honeybees are in Minnesota are primarily managed bees. So usually when you see honeybees, it means that there's someone within a couple miles of you that is keeping honeybee colonies. Sometimes they can survive on their own in the winter, but a lot of times they need beekeepers helping to take care of them. So honeybees are not native in Minnesota, but we do have them here wherever people are keeping honeybees, which is throughout a lot of the state. So to recognize honeybees, they're kind of a more slender bee. They have kind of a torpedo-shaped abdomen. They have these pollen baskets on their hind legs. So these two pictures here, you can see the pollen on their hind legs. This one just has a little bit, the bottom picture has just a little bit of pollen there, whereas the top picture has this nice full pollen basket. So they are collecting pollen, they're mixing with a little bit of nectar, forming it into a ball so it looks kind of shiny, solid bit of pollen that's stuck on their legs. The color of honeybees can vary. There are kind of different types of honeybees that people like to keep. Some of them are very light colored, some of them are dark. So it can be, kind of dark brown to a light amber color for their body with their stripes. When you're looking out for honeybees and you're wondering what might be confused with the honeybees, there are some really good fly mimics that are out there. So this is a fly mimic that has that nice amber color, has the stripes, but you'll notice it does not have a thin waist. So all bees will have a thin waist. They also have really big eyes. So that's one of the things to look out for that might be a honeybee. They also, when you're looking out there and you're looking at them forage, they forage on a lot of different kinds of flowers, but you will often see them in groups. So when honeybees find a flower that they like, they're able to communicate that to the other bees back in the colony, and more will show up there. So a lot of times you'll see more than one foraging in an area. They're usually active whenever the temperature is above 60 degrees. So even on, kind of really colds, when we're still kind of in winter, if we get one of those weird warm days, you'll sometimes see honeybees out flying. Another major group of bees are the bumblebees. So bumblebees are what a lot of times people will picture when they picture a bee. They're big, they're fuzzy, they also have those pollen baskets. So look for those on the hind legs. Those are only there on the females. We're not going to get into super detailed stuff of how do you tell the females from the males, but um, for honeybees, you really just mostly see the females out there on the flowers. Bumblebees, you will see some males, but they'll still be these big, really hairy bees. A lot of them are yellow and black, but sometimes they will also have red or orange or brown or white colors on them as well. And here is for the person that was asking about, are there any fly mimics that or things that are mimicking bees that eat them? This is one of these assassin bugs that does assassin flies that does a really good job of looking like a bee, but you will sometimes see these robber flies actually eating honeybees and bumblebees. So that is a mimic to look out for. Um, we do in Minnesota. We're lucky to be home to one of the endangered insects that are federally protected. So the rusty patch bumblebee is a bee that used to be found throughout a lot of the kind of upper Midwest, only found in some spots. We do see them still here in Minnesota. So this is definitely a bumblebee to keep an eye out for. They do have a couple of distinctive features for this species. So if you've narrowed it down to being a bumblebee, it's big, it's fuzzy, it's this robust bee visiting flowers. You can look for this thumb tack shape that's on its thorax. So head, thorax, abdomen on the bees. This has the rusty patch bumblebee has these black hairs that go kind of between the wings here with a little bit of black that comes back. So it's this kind of thumbtack or umbrella shape. They also have, oops, I'm trying to go back, but it's not letting me. They also have this rusty patch. So the rusty patch can sometimes be be in the photo here, it's bright orange. Sometimes it looks more kind of brown. Sometimes it's bigger or smaller. It can be hard to see when it's underneath the wings, but there will be kind of yellow all around that rusty patch, as opposed to some other species that also have kind of the red patch. There will be black right up against it. Bumblebees also forage on a lot of different flowers, like the honeybees do. A distinctive characteristic when you're out looking at the bumblebees on flowers is they do make this low hum. You'll kind of hear them going. Zzz. They're also active for a long time. They're active from May through September. Another major bee group to keep an eye out for on your flowers that you've planted for bees are green metallic bees. So these are commonly found in a lot of different garden habitats, a lot of different flowers. They are small to medium-sized bees. So these are smaller than the bumblebees and honeybees, and they have green metallic heads and thorax. Their abdomen for some species is metallic green. For some of them, it's yellow and black striped. There is a green metallic wasp that can be confused with this. This one is all green. They're smaller. They have wide heads. They have a lot of pits kind of in their structure of their exoskeleton. They will also, you won't see them being covered in pollen like you will with the green metallic bees when they're out there. I mentioned they forage on a lot of different flowers. They really love flowers in the family Asteraceae. So there's a lot of different flowers there. There's asters, there's sunflowers, zinnias, all kinds of different things. They are active from May through September. So they also are out there for most of the season. And you'll see them kind of actively going into the flowers to collect pollen. Then we have a group called the chap-legged bees. This is a group that's sometimes also called the longhorn bee. These are stout, small to medium-sized bees, so they can be the size of some of the smaller bumblebees. But some of them are smaller. And here, one of the things to look for to see if you have a chap-legged bee is if you have the females, you'll be able to see pollen kind of below their knees. So on their back leg, that kind of big curve that they have there, their big elbow there. You can see pollen there. This is the same place that the pollen baskets can show up on the bumblebees, but these are they don't have a basket. The pollen's being collected in these brushes. So you can see here, this isn't like a big ball of pollen that's stuck on there. It's a brush. So you can see it looks not as solid. It looks more feathery. So those are hairs that are all over their hind legs that they're collecting the pollen in. If you see the males, they have these very, very long antennae. So that's why sometimes these bees are also called long-horned bees. Bees also really love flowers in the family Asteraceae. You can see this chap-legged bee has really, really full pollen hairs on those back legs. So she's really able to pack a lot of pollen in there. These bees are out just from mid to late summer. So we don't see these bees showing up until July. And then they'll be active from July to August. There's a group of bees. This is only an Elaine thing to call them armpit bees. You won't see this. I've never seen anybody else use this term, but I use this term for the bees that carry pollen higher up on their arms. So those chap-legged bees and the bumblebees, we were seeing pollen down on the bottom part of their hind legs. But there are a whole bunch of bees that carry pollen higher up, closer to their thorax. So there are a lot of different bees that fit in this group. So they're medium to small bees. A lot of them have dark colored and will have stripes on the abdomen. Some are also blue or gray metallic. And these bees also will visit many different types of flowers, though within the different groups, which in the different kinds of bees, some of them do specialize on certain kinds of plants. And since this encompasses a lot of different bees, they're also active for a lot of different time through the active season from April through September. One group there, I'm going to point out a few of these kind of armpit bees that you can pick out from different characteristics they have. So one of the more diverse groups of bees that we have here in Minnesota are the mining bees. So they're in the genus Andrena. And these bees, they carry that pollen high up on their back legs. If you look at their abdomen, it's kind of a little squished. It's like they had a round abdomen and someone just kind of squished it down. They also, if you get a good view of their heads, they have these divots that are sometimes really furry that are between the eyes and the antennae. So we can really see it on this bee here, where there's just this kind of divot here that's filled in with some fuzzy hairs. These bees are some of the earliest bees that we'll see in the spring. Kind of as soon as willows start blooming, you can go out and look for these mining bees out on those willows. There are different species that will come out at different times through the summer. They are commonly found in woodlands, and a lot of a lot of these will specialize on certain kinds of flowers. A lot of the ones that come out kind of in the later part of the season will be on those plants that are in the family Asteraceae. I just saw the question pop up in the chat, which I will answer live of are mining bees solitary? And they are. So a lot of these bees we're talking about are solitary. So bumblebees are social. There's a few and honeybees are social. There are some sweat bees and some other bees that have different levels of sociality, but all of the mining bees are solitary ground nesting bees. The carpenter bees are a bee that it has that does have some sociality to them. They do kind of stay back in their nests and cooperate with each other, with their sisters. Whereas the solitary bees, it's just a mom will lay eggs and then she leaves them alone. And those eggs and larvae just develop totally on their own. For the small carpenter bees, these bees are blue metallic. They have these yellow marks on their faces. Their abdomens really have this kind of barrel shape, but then they have this little kind of point down at the end. They also tend to have these kind of puppy dog paws. So when you see them when they're flying or when they're not just standing on their legs, they kind of have their front legs kind of curved like a puppy dog. These bees, the small carpenter bees, they are active from early spring through late fall. We just have a couple of different species of these small carpenter bees in Minnesota, but they are pretty abundant. They're pretty easy to find. They're common and in a lot of yards and gardens. So here we have a place to talk about a bunch of other sweat bees. So we talked about the green metallic sweat bees, which is a kind of sweat bee, but then there are a lot of other sweat bees. Some of them are solitary, some of them are social. They're medium to small sized bees. So our smallest bees that we have in Minnesota are some of these species of sweat bees. They have their pollen really high up on their legs and kind of a rounded abdomen. I see also another question I'll answer live of why are they called sweat bees? So these bees, for their food, they're going out to flowers and they're collecting pollen and nectar, but they will also come to people and land on you and lick up your sweat. They'll visit other mammals too. And they are collecting minerals from your sweat. So that is how they get the name sweat bee, because they do this often enough that people definitely notice them doing this. Unfortunately, if you're getting sweaty, in the crack of your elbow and then they land there and you bend your elbow, they will give you a little sting. So you some of you have maybe experienced this, maybe you didn't even know it was them. It's yeah, it is something that does happen. So there are two different genera, but lots and lots of different species of sweat bees that we have here in Minnesota. And here's the information about them landing on people. And because there are so many different species, there really are a lot of different kinds of plants that they're visiting as well. Another group of bees are the yellow-faced bees. This is a very interesting group of bees. If you first take a look at them, they might look more like a wasp than a bee. They are not super hairy, and they are an exception to that bees being fuzzy. They don't have pollen collecting hairs on the outside of their body. They do still have those branched hairs like all bees do, but they're not super fuzzy. They do still collect pollen, but what they do is they'll eat the pollen, they store it in their crop, and then when they get back to the nest, they regurgitate it to feed their young. So they are called yellow-faced bees because they are mostly black, but then they have these yellow marks on the fronts of their faces. There are some really cute wasps that can be confused with the yellow-faced bees. These square-headed wasps also have that black and yellow look, but they have these much bigger heads. So these bees are active from June through August. And as I mentioned, they just you can see this bee going around just kind of eating the pollen, as opposed to a lot of the other bees when they're visiting flowers, you'll see them kind of scramble in there and then they'll move the pollen around to where they're storing it. Another group of bees are the leafcutter bees. These are also stocky bees. Some of them are similar to bumblebee size. Some are smaller, but they have these really broad heads. They have really big mandibles. Another thing to look for these bees, for the females, they will have pollen collecting hairs on the underside of their abdomen. So everyone else we've been talking about has been storing pollen on their legs. For the leafcutter bees, they're storing pollen on their abdomens. And they are, it's a beautiful shot of this leafcutter cutting the leaf, which they use to line their nest. So also if you're out looking at plants and looking at flowers, if you see perfectly round holes cut in the leaves, that's from leafcutter bees that have gotten these leaves to cut them out to bring them home. So they have a very high pitched buzz. So I mentioned the bumblebees being down more like these are more like and they are really fast. So if you see them on the flowers, they'll be zipping, zipping, zipping around. They are will visit a lot of different kinds of flowers, active from May through September. This bottom one here is a male leafcutter bee, which the males sometimes are not as involved in the flowers. Sometimes they're flying around the flowers looking for females, but those big fuzzy front legs are a characteristic of the leaf cutter males, and they have those fuzzy legs to help them grab females. And we have another spot here to pause for questions. I do see one in the chat there. Is their active time spanned in months based on nighttime temperatures, daylight hours, favorite food sources, going dormant, or something else? Did you want to answer that one, Elise?
Sure. I thought this was a good question that kind of ties into sort of plant pollinator interactions and that everybody might be interested in. But this differs kind of based on the species that we're focusing on. But it's kind of a combination of these factors. So, the seasonality, the time of year, and the current temperature can influence when a bee comes out from overwintering, longer daylight hours as well. The daylight hours are also important for monarch butterflies and kind of cueing them to begin their migration. And the favorite food sources piece is really important because we're going to talk about this really briefly because I know we're almost at time here at the end, but there are many bees that are considered specialists, so meaning they forage for pollen on only one type or one group of plants. And those bees will emerge at the same time that host plant starts blooming for them. So many of these different factors are kind of what are influencing bees from emerge to where they're overwintering.
There's another question there about what makes native bees better. I'm going to put that in quotes for the environment than say a honeybee. So so honeybees are out there. They do pollinate. They tend to be um, focus more on. They visit a lot of different kinds of plants, but they tend to focus on whichever plant is producing the most nectar or pollen at that time. And so there's a lot of native plants that they don't visit. So if you have, native plants, you want to be, you're concerned about all your native plants being pollinated. That is something that diversity of native bees is going to be better suited for. But, any individual, even of the native bees, is just going to have certain plants that they visit. Um, Honeybees also, they have really big colonies. And because of that thing where they're able to communicate to each other and go to that best resource, sometimes then if there's not enough flowers around for everybody, the honeybees, because they have such big colonies, they're able to kind of get there first, get the most out, and may not be leaving enough for the rest of the native bees that are not as able to do all of that communicating that they do. So we do have concern when there's lots of honeybees in the environment and not lots and lots of flowers that honeybees do have the potential to take away resources that are needed by the native bees.
There are a couple more coming in. I don't know if you wanted to answer them now or if you wanted to finish what you've got, Elise. What are you thinking?
Yeah, the last couple slides that I have are about some actions to help pollinators that I think might answer these questions. So I'll kind of run through those really quickly, and then if they're not answered, we can come back to things.
Awesome.
All right, so I know we're kind of preaching to the choir here about taking actions to help pollinators. I know most of you in this webinar, already have pollinator gardens or are interested in planting more pollinator habitat, but we're just going to talk really briefly and quickly about our 4 actions to help pollinators. The first of these actions is planting flowers, and that means planting a diversity of flowers that bloom all season long, from early spring through late fall, and keeping these plants free of pesticides, including fungicides and insecticides. So why is it important to plant a diversity of flowers? Many bees that we talked about today, like bumblebees specifically, are what we consider to be generalist foragers, meaning they will forage from lots of different plant species. They don't require the pollen from one specific plant. They will kind of visit what's blooming at whatever time of year they are active. But there are many bee species that are considered specialists that have different traits. And these specialist bees will visit either one group of flowers, for example, this Melisodes, also known as a chap-legged bee, specializes on flowers that are in the sunflower family. This mining bee on the right here specializes on goldenrods. So you will find these bees only foraging for pollen from these types of flowers. And why is this important to consider when we're talking about pollinator habitat? So of the 508 species recorded from the state, I said 525 in the beginning. That's because the number of bees we've discovered in Minnesota has gone up since we published our Bees of Minnesota. But there's a good handful of these bees that have not been documented in the past 50 years, and many of these bees are specialists and kleptoparasites, meaning that they can be a little bit more challenging to find. If their host plant for specialist bees is not readily available, it's going to be much more challenging to find or support that bee. Kleptoparasites are another important group of bees that we didn't talk about. So these are bees that don't collect pollen. They will lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. This is a nomad bee who laid her eggs inside a mining bee nest. There are also species of bumblebees that are considered these cuckoo bees or kleptoparasites, where they will invade a nest and lay their own eggs. This sounds really scary, but kleptoparasites are kind of a sign that the host bee's population is healthy enough to support that cuckoo or parasitic species. And many of these kleptoparasites are dependent on bees that are specialists. So to learn more about kind of all of these bee groups that we've talked about and more about specialist bees, Heather Holm has a really informative website, beesmn.org, where there's lots of species profiles for these different bees, including the pollen specialists, as well as just kind of a lot of general information about bees. And to kind of tie, this back to the action of planting flowers, we were talking about planting a diversity of flowers that can support those specialists is going to be the best way to support a wide variety of bees. Our second action to help pollinators is provide homes and providing a diversity of nesting habitat. So over 80% of bees nest in the ground. They will dig tunnels in the ground. Some prefer bare patches of soil in disturbed areas, where others prefer more disturbed areas. The other about 20% of bees are cavity nesting. So some of our bees that nest in these hollow cavities are our leafcutter bees. Mason bees, which we didn't talk about today, are also cavity nesters. And cutting back your plant stems or keeping some logs or stumps can create nesting habitat. Bumblebees need nesting habitat as well. We're still learning a lot about where bumblebees prefer to nest, but keeping patches of dried grass and sticks in undisturbed areas can help to support bumblebees, and then providing larval forage for caterpillars as well. Our third action is climate action. Habitat loss, extreme weather events, and rain shifts are all affecting pollinators. So, using clean energy sources, supporting environmental regulations, and planting more trees and grasslands are great ways to take climate action. I saw there was a question in the chat about, plants blooming a little bit earlier in some gardens this year. And I think, we've had a really, really warm summer, and that can definitely affect when things are blooming. But it's the plants in gardens are sometimes a little bit off schedule, or will sometimes bloom a little bit earlier than plants in kind of larger restored habitats. And there's always oddballs. There's always plants that are going to bloom early, always pollinators that are going to emerge early, and that kind of helps these plants and things adapt as our climate is changing. And then our fourth action is collect data. So this is the idea of community or participatory science, participating in collecting data even if you don't have a science background. So joining a project like the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project or uploading observations to Bumblebee Watch or iNaturalist is a great way to support pollinators. And then just one quick little plug here. Another way to help pollinators is to become a pollinator educator. We have this program through the Bee Lab called Pollinator Ambassadors, where we teach volunteers how to be pollinator educators and then provide them with outreach and education materials. There is an application on our Pollinator Ambassadors website, which is pollinatorambassadors.umn.edu. We're looking for more pollinator ambassadors around Minnesota to participate in this program. It's been really fun the last few years that we've been doing it. And that kind of wraps up the last little bits of things. I know we're at 7 o'clock, so I don't expect folks to stay over time, but we'd be happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you so much. I know that there are a couple other questions that have kind of trickled in. Happy to stay on to answer them. For anybody who has to leave, I just want to say thank you for joining us. We'll stick around for a minute just to answer some questions, and be sure to grab those links to some of the resources and things that we threw in the chat, including that Pollinator Ambassadors program, which is a really incredible program, to learn more and to be able to help teach others about our pollinators in Minnesota. So thank you, presenters. Really appreciate it. For the questions, I know that there are a few coming into the Q&A. I also wanted to make sure we got to this one that was in the chat from Lorna. Do all bees go into torpor on plants overnight?
Most bees are going back to their nests at night. So all bees we call them central place foragers. So they have a nest that they're going back to. There are times of the year when especially male bees have been kind of kicked out of the nests. And those are the ones that you'll see out on plants at night. And sometimes they'll cluster together to try to keep each other warm.
Susan had asked, are there any tips for photographing bees with phones? I want to upload to Bee Machine and iNaturalist, but the bees are so tricky to photograph.
Yeah, they are.
We have a video that's going to be coming out soon. Some tips and tricks for that. But one thing that people do sometimes, they do move so fast. Just taking a lot of photos helps. If you have an iPhone, you can use the live photo, which kind of takes like a little video. You can also just take a video and grab stills from it. So by taking a video, you can catch a bee moving at different angles. It does help to have a few different angles of the bee to be able to get good IDs on them. So it's nice if you can get a shot kind of straight down on the top so you can see the abdomen and the thorax. Having a shot from the side as well as a shot where we can see the face. Those all help us to ID things.
Are there any resources specifically for children to get them excited about finding bees? Do you guys work with kids a lot?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we have these pollinator education toolkits that are available virtually for free or as physical toolkits through the bookstore. But they have lots of different activities that cover things like why pollinators are important, pollinator diversity. There's a couple of games in there. There's one called Monarch Mishaps that shows kind of the challenges that monarchs face as they're migrating. But I think the pollinator toolkit is great for helping people to get excited about bees because it puts, bees and pollinators kind of into context of why they're important in our day-to-day lives. One of the activities is called the pollinator plate, and it shows how our favorite foods might look different if there were no more pollinators. And I think sort of starting there can help create that curiosity about bees and create more questions and excitement about kind of who the bees or those other pollinators are.
And Taylor was wondering, where can we find some links to those?
I can find the link.
Ah, you're amazing. Thanks, Elise. There are a couple of different questions about if there's anything special we should be doing to help bees in the severe heat right now. Any tips or anything we can do?
Really, taking climate action is the best thing that we can do. They do have good adaptations. A lot of bee species have adaptations for dealing with the heat. There are some, extremes that it gets beyond what they can tolerate. A lot of times they will just kind of sit back in their nests, which are usually in cooler areas, but then they're not able to forage as much. So really making sure that when they are able to get out, that there's lots of flowers that are easy for them to find and that are providing lots of nutrition for them that can help them, to make up for the time they lost from the severe weather.
Um, do you see that there are any specialist bees that don't have enough of the plant that they should have? And what plants are those that we should be planting more of?
That's a really good question. And it's something we don't really have a good answer for. We know we see more of these specialist bees when there are more of those flowers around. There are a few plants that we know support a lot of different specialists. So purple prairie clover, Dahlia purpurea, or any of the prairie clovers, dahlia plants are kind of support a lot of different specialists, as well as the lead plant, Morpha canescens, is another one that just has a lot of specialists. But there's all kinds of different cool flowers that the fringed loosestrife, which is more in wetlands. It's not the purple loosestrife; it's a native. It's a beautiful, yeah, yellow flower. When we find that flower, we find the oil bee that specializes on that flower. So really the best thing is just like there's a few of those powerhouses for specialists, but just diversity is the key.
Cynthia had a question about when you see a rusty patch bumblebee, should we report it anywhere other than Bumblebee Watch? Something like with the DNR or Bee Lab. And what about seeing queens in spring as they emerge?
Yep. Putting rusty patch bumblebees on Bumblebee Watch is perfect. All the people who need to see it will see it when it's there. Um, Seeing queens emerge in the spring, that's great to document. Bumblebee Watch is another, great place to document that. Or, if you, yeah, if you what the timing for when queens are coming out, it's nice to get those observations to see when it's happening. I did see a question that was there that said something about like what plants aren't getting planted enough, or are there any? And native thistles are great. They're great bee plants. They play a lot more nicely than a lot of the invasive thistle plants. Some people are not as likely to plant because thistles have such a bad reputation. But the native thistles, Cirsium discolor field thistle is one of my favorites. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful plant. I also think sneezeweed just has an unfortunate name, but it's a wonderful pollinator plant that is probably not planted as much because of the bad name.
It also, I think, looks like a plant out of Dr. Seuss. It is one of my
Hmm.
favorite, is the cutest little flower. So definitely plant some sneezeweed. Same with the thistle, actually, honestly. They both kind of have a Dr. Seuss vibe. The last question I have here is any good book recommendations about bees, pollinators? Kind of left it
Ooh.
open.
I really love, there's two books by Heather Holm about bees and pollinators, and one is Bees of the Midwest. Wait, what is it called?
Uh, I'll
Heather
find it.
Holm is the author, and she has two books. One has a lot more kind of resources for ID, and one has a lot more resources about kind of the plant pollinator interactions. Um, yeah, pollinators of native plants is the one, I'm pretty sure. um, and not to just focus on Heather, but she also has a beautiful wasp book. That's really a lot of fun.
And
Um,
a flower fly book as well.
there's also Bees in Your Backyard, which covers North America for bees, and that has great resources for ID and just learning about bee biology, and covers a really wide diversity of bees.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Elaine and Elise, this has been so much fun. I've learned so much. I hope everyone here has too. I want to say thank you to everyone who stayed a little bit later to get some of these questions answered. They were fabulous.